Well, how big is the tent? This was a question that I wanted to look at because early on, I had to decide where I fit in the emerging conversation. Is the tent really small? Is it just Brian McLaren in the emergent village? Or is the tent bigger than that? Does it encompass more? Is there something going on in the evangelical and Christian world that's much bigger than one or two thinkers? Because if it's just a couple thinkers at emergent village, if you don't agree with them, then it's really easy to push them off and marginalize them. But if what's going on in the church in the emerging conversation is much larger than one small group, then it's something we need to deal with. And so early on, I would ask a lot of the people I was interviewing, how big is the tent? Are you under the tent? Is this group in it? Who's in it? I know even to ask that question is kind of very unemerging because someone isn't in the tent. I get that. But if we're going to have any type of intelligent conversation, you've got to set boundaries on something. I mean, you can't. There's just no way to have, you got to know who's a little bit of who you're talking about, and I think that's important. But what I decided, or what I figured early on, is that the tent was pretty wide. The tent was pretty big. It was encompassing a lot of groups. And part of the misunderstanding that was happening going back both ways was that each side thought the tent was a lot smaller. And so they would attack it for being just one little grouping. So I felt like, as I looked at it, that the most helpful typology out there was Ed Stetzer's, and he talks about the 3 R's. Does everybody know these? Does anybody know what they are? First one is relevance. And those are the guys, the churches, that are most like the traditional church in their theology, but have contextualized a great deal of how they do the music. So I guess this just means they have drums and a guitar. Like when I asked Dan Kimball, Dan, where do you fit in? Where does your church fit in up in Santa Cruz? I said, are you more in the relevance camp? He said, yeah. At the time, he said that's where we would have fit in. So they're mostly very similar theology, maybe some changes, but just more different, a little different in how it's contextualized, how we reach out to culture, those sorts of things. The second group was the Reconstructionists. And this was, according to Stetzer, these were more of the guys that were in the Anabaptist movement who were really thinking about ecclesiology, who were thinking we need to restructure the church. The church is just a hierarchy. It's top down. We've got leadership at the top going down. We don't have missional leadership. We don't have a missional church. We need to rethink how we do our ecclesiology. So these are the guys like Mike Frost and Ed Hirsch, Alan Hirsch, and who are rethinking the whole idea of ecclesiology and what the church is supposed to look like. And they tend to want to, get rid of ordination, get rid of formal titles, have more of a lay leadership, those sorts of things. I would put the organic church in that as well. The third group was the Revisionists. And this is the group that gets the most pushback. This is Emergent Village. This is Brian McLaren. This would be Tony Jones, Doug Padgett. These were the guys that were early on who were mostly interested in the theology of the evangelical church. And I think in some ways they still are. They were the ones that really wanted to say that every theological formulation we have needs to be put back up on the table, including the Trinity, you name it. Our views of justification need to be put up back on the table, and we need to rediscuss it and decide afresh and anew for our generation which ones that we like and which ones we think we're going to keep and that sort of thing. Now, you can imagine when somebody puts some of these core first-tier doctrines up on the table and say this is Nicene Creed stuff, this is stuff that we can rethink, why those in the traditional church would get very uneasy by that and really push back hard. And what you find is a lot of the literature that's being written against things emerging are really written against the emergent village and what they're doing theologically. That's what makes the traditional church most uncomfortable. But when I was writing Deep Church, I didn't want the whole movement to be reduced to a couple thinkers. And even when I talked to Brian McLaren about that, he would agree. He would say, that's not fair. Yeah, the merging is much bigger. And when I sat down with Tony Jones and Doug Padgett, they were just as critical, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way, but they were just as critical of the other parts of the emerging church as they were of the traditional church. So we have to be real careful what we're talking about. And so in the book, I make the distinction. I just try and clarify what emerging is, these three things, and what emergent village is, which tends to be, not always, but tends to be part of the revisionist camp. I think it's unfortunate. I agree with Dan Kimball that it's unfortunate that emergent village took the same name as the emerging church, which is the broader movement. And I think that's often confusing. And so you'll see guys that will just call everything emergent the emergence. And I don't think that's accurate. One reviewer kept accusing me of certain things, and he kept using the term emergent for the whole movement, and it clearly didn't take the time to read that part of my book. So